Story 1. The Disappearing Moon. It was a night like no other. A night when the world seemed to be at peace. A small, quiet town sat nestled between endless, rolling plains, its houses scattered like forgotten dreams beneath the wide, open sky. There was no noise, no distraction, just the soft hum of the earth beneath their feet, the cool evening air that carried the scent of fresh grass, and the stars beginning to twinkle in the heavens above. It was the kind of night that invited you to slow down, breathe deeply, and gaze up at the night sky. As the clock struck midnight, the moon began to rise, glowing softly at first, casting a silvery light across the land. It wasn't just any moon. It was the full moon, so bright and so full that it seemed as though the world itself was bathed in light. The moon hung in the sky, steady and sure, watching over the small town below. People, from their front porches and backyards, looked up and marveled at its beauty as they always did. It was a familiar presence, the moon, timeless, constant, and reassuring. But then, something strange began to happen. As the hours passed, the moon, which had been shining so brightly, began to fade. It wasn't the kind of fade that happens when clouds obscure the sky or when the light softens with the coming of dawn. No, this was different. The brightness of the moon gradually diminished, as if someone was slowly turning down the dimmer switch, until the soft, silver glow began to disappear. At first, people thought it was just their imagination. After all, the moon had always been so predictable, so consistent. But then, as they gazed up, they noticed it wasn't just dimming, it was vanishing. Slowly, like an image fading into the mist, the moon seemed to erase itself from existence, like a memory that was slowly being forgotten. One moment, the full moon had been there, filling the night with its light. The next, it was gone, completely gone. The sky above was an empty void, as if the moon had never been there at all. The townsfolk were left staring into the black sky in stunned silence. There were no clouds, no storms. The air was calm, and the wind barely stirred. Yet, the moon had disappeared entirely, as if it had never existed. Some people tried to convince themselves it was a trick of the eyes, perhaps a fleeting illusion. Others checked their watches, hoping the night was just passing quickly, but it was clear the moon was simply gone. A strange unease settled over the town. A few people murmured to each other, "Did you see that?" But no one had any answers. How could the moon just vanish without a trace? How could something so constant, so dependable, simply disappear from the sky? Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the people of the town searched the heavens, scanning the sky in every direction. The moon was nowhere to be found. There was no explanation, no reason for this impossible occurrence. They stood in disbelief, wondering if they had imagined it. Perhaps they had all dreamt the sight of it, the brilliant full moon, only to wake up in a world where it was no longer there. It was an unsettling feeling, like something was terribly wrong with the fabric of reality itself. Some of the more curious and adventurous souls began walking outside of town, their eyes fixed on the sky, looking for some hint, some sign that the moon would return. But there was nothing, only the deep, unbroken blackness of the night, stretching out over the plains. But then, just as the town's collective anxiety began to reach its peak, something remarkable happened. Without any warning, the moon began to reappear, just as suddenly as it had disappeared. At first, there was only the faintest glimmer, a tiny speck of light in the distance, far away at the edge of the sky. Slowly, steadily, the moon grew larger and brighter, until it was once again the full, radiant orb it had been just moments before. The people stood in awe, staring up at it with a mix of wonder and confusion. How could it have vanished like that, and then returned so effortlessly? For a moment, the town remained still, their eyes fixed on the moon, as if they were waiting for an explanation. But the moon said nothing. It just shone, its light bathing the earth in the familiar glow that had always been there. It was the same moon, yes, but it was different too. There was something about that moment, something about the way the moon had disappeared and reappeared, that left the townsfolk with a sense of awe and mystery. Some people claimed that the event was a glitch, a break in the fabric of reality itself, like a hiccup in the natural order of things. Others whispered that it was a message, a sign to remind them that the universe was not as predictable as it seemed. Perhaps the moon had invited them to look deeper, to consider the things they had long taken for granted. Perhaps it was a reminder that the world was full of mysteries, and not everything could be explained with logic and reason. And yet, for all the theories, no one really knew what had happened that night. No one could explain how or why the moon had disappeared. But one thing was certain. No one who witnessed it would ever forget that eerie moment when the moon simply vanished. It was a mystery that remained unsolved, a glitch in the matrix of the world that no one could quite comprehend. And as the night slowly faded into dawn, and the people of the town went back to their lives, they couldn't shake the feeling that they had witnessed something much larger than themselves. The moon, which had always seemed like a steadfast friend, had shown them a glimpse of something far beyond the ordinary, and they couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the universe held in the quiet moments of the night. As the sun began to rise and the moon faded from view, the town settled back into its peaceful, sleepy routine. But for those who had witnessed the moon's strange disappearance, there would always be that lingering sense of wonder, the feeling that, just perhaps, there were far more mysteries in the world than they could ever hope to uncover. And so, as the moon disappeared into the horizon and the day began, the people closed their eyes, each carrying with them the strange story of that night, the night when the moon simply vanished. Story 2. The Silent Moon. Long ago, in a small, secluded village surrounded by mist-covered mountains and endless forests, there was a deep, quiet connection between the people and the night sky. The villagers, though isolated from the bustling world beyond, had lived harmoniously with nature for centuries, following the rhythm of the seasons, the winds, and the ever-changing sky above. In this place, the moon was more than just a celestial body. It was a companion, a constant presence that whispered to the people in ways they could never fully understand. For generations, the villagers had come to recognize the moon's subtle, nightly song. It wasn't a sound like any other. It was a faint hum, a gentle vibration that seemed to pulse through the still night air. It was not a noise that could be heard with the ears. but more like a vibration that resonated deep within the heart. A quiet hum that stirred something ancient and mysterious in the soul. The villagers would stand outside, their heads tilted toward the sky, listening to this melody that seemed to come from the very core of the moon itself. It was said that the moon's song carried wisdom, perhaps even a message that only those who truly listened could understand. The moon's hum became a familiar part of the night's ritual. As the sun set and the stars emerged, the villagers would settle into their homes, but never without first glancing up at the sky to hear the soft melody that floated down, enveloping the world in peace. No one questioned it. It had always been there, a natural part of life. And in return for its quiet presence, the moon was worshipped, honored with offerings of flowers, sweet herbs, and small tokens of gratitude. It was a bond that went beyond understanding, something sacred and unspoken. But one night, something changed. It began on the evening of the full moon. The sky was clear, and the air was calm. As usual, the villagers stood in their doorways and gazed up at the sky, eagerly awaiting the familiar hum of the moon. But instead of the usual gentle vibration, the night was silent. Not a single note, not even the faintest whisper. The air was still, and the world felt oddly hushed, as if the very atmosphere held its breath. The villagers, confused and uneasy, exchanged nervous glances, wondering if they had imagined it. Perhaps it was a fluke, they thought. Maybe something was wrong with their senses. But as the night wore on, the silence persisted. For 3 consecutive nights, the moon remained silent. At first, the villagers tried to ignore it. They continued their lives, though there was a growing unease in their hearts. They tried to keep their minds busy with work, with daily routines, but the absence of the familiar hum, the quiet song of the moon, left them restless. Some spoke of it openly, while others only whispered in hushed tones, as though afraid to speak too loudly, afraid of attracting the moon's attention, or worse, its anger. The silence of the moon affected the whole village. The children, who had once fallen asleep easily to the soft hum of the night, now tossed and turned in their beds, unable to find peace. The animals, too, seemed uneasy, pacing in circles or staring nervously at the sky. The adults, who were once so certain of the safety and constancy of the night, now found themselves uneasy. They no longer felt the moon's comforting presence, and the darkness seemed to stretch out longer, as if the night itself had become deeper, more mysterious, even a little frightening. The silence of the moon was something new, something unknown. It was as though the rhythm of the world had been broken, and the villagers could sense it, even if they couldn't explain why. They began to wonder, was the moon trying to tell them something? Or had something gone wrong in the natural order of the universe? Some of the elders whispered that this was a sign, perhaps a warning from the heavens, a disruption in the cosmic balance. But just as suddenly as the silence had begun on the 4th night, the hum returned. It came slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The villagers had gathered in the central square, speaking in hushed tones, trying to comfort each other and find some meaning in the strange events. And then, just as they were about to give up hope, they felt it, like the softest vibration, like the first whisper of a breeze. The air seemed to shiver with life, and a faint, familiar hum began to fill the night, rising from the moon like a long-lost song returning home. The villagers, who had stood in tense silence, suddenly exhaled in relief. Some of them smiled. Others clasped their hands together in thanks. It was as though a weight had been lifted from their hearts. The moon had returned to its usual rhythm, its song once again filling the air with its peaceful presence. The world, it seemed, was back in balance. But the return of the moon's hum did not bring complete comfort. Though the villagers resumed their lives, something had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. They no longer looked at the moon the same way. They had heard the silence, the unsettling stillness that had filled the sky for those 3 long nights, and now they couldn't forget it. They couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the moon's song than they had ever realized. Was the silence a warning? A message they hadn't understood? Or was it simply a glitch in the cosmic system, a brief pause in the natural order of things? The elders, in their wisdom, spoke in hushed tones about the possibility that the moon's hum was more than just a sound. Perhaps it was a reflection of the state of the world, or a reminder of the delicate balance of life itself. The silence had shaken them all, and they began to wonder what other mysteries lay hidden beneath the surface of their everyday lives. From that night onward, the villagers would sometimes find themselves standing outside, gazing up at the moon, waiting for the familiar hum to fill the air. But they listened with new ears, as if searching for something more, something deeper. The moon, once so simple and steady, had become a source of mystery, a reminder that the universe was full of secrets, some of which they might never understand. And so, as the seasons passed, the villagers carried on with their lives, but they never forgot those 3 silent nights when the moon had stopped singing. And on quiet evenings, when the moon was full and the night was still, they would close their eyes and listen, wondering if the hum would ever disappear again. Perhaps the silence of the moon was a message that the world itself was not as predictable as they had once thought, that the rhythms of the universe were far more fragile than they had realized. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was a reminder that the mysteries of the night sky were not meant to be fully understood, but only appreciated in their own time, when the moon decided to share its song once more. Story 3. The moon that changed its color. There are many things about the moon that we've come to accept as normal. We know how it follows its familiar cycle, how it shifts from one phase to the next, from the new moon to the full moon and back again. We've all seen the moon turn an eerie red during a blood moon, or take on a warm golden hue during the harvest moon. These changes in the moon's appearance, while unusual, are natural. They can be explained by the alignment of the earth, the sun, and the moon. But one night, something happened that defied all explanation. It wasn't the result of any known celestial event. No eclipse, no supermoon, and no unusual alignment of stars. It was a quiet, ordinary evening, just like any other. The moon was high in the sky, casting its usual pale light across the earth. It wasn't particularly bright, nor particularly dim. It was just the moon, doing what it always did. Or so it seemed. As the night wore on, something strange began to happen. Those who happened to be awake gazing up at the moon as they often did, began to notice a subtle shift. At first, it was so faint that they couldn't quite believe their eyes. The moon, usually a soft white, began to change color, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. It was a gradual shift, like the faintest brushstroke of green being applied to the moon's glowing surface. Some of the villagers who saw it thought it was simply a trick of the light. Perhaps the clouds had cast a shadow over the moon, or the atmosphere was reflecting something unusual. But as time passed, the change became undeniable. The moon, once a crisp white, had begun to glow with an intense, almost unnatural shade of green. The entire surface of the moon shimmered, as though it were alive, pulsing with a strange, eerie energy. At first, no one knew how to react. People stood in their yards, on their porches, and by their windows, staring up in awe and fear. The moon no longer looked like the moon. It didn't have the soft, comforting glow that they were used to. It looked foreign, almost like an alien object, something that didn't belong in the night sky. Some of the villagers whispered that it was a sign, a message from the heavens. Others felt a sense of unease, a feeling that something was terribly wrong. The moon's green hue was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. It was as though the moon itself was an otherworldly being, pulsing with energy and radiating a strange, unexplainable power. The glow was almost hypnotic, drawing people's eyes upward, unable to look away. It was as though the moon was beckoning them, calling them to witness something extraordinary, something beyond human understanding. As the minutes passed, the moon's green glow intensified, becoming brighter, almost as if it were alive. The entire landscape below seemed to bathe in this eerie green light, casting long shadows that twisted and danced across the ground. The air itself felt charged with an unseen energy, as though the very atmosphere had shifted, becoming thicker and more vibrant with the moon's strange radiance. The townspeople gathered in small groups, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. Some tried to capture the moment with their phones. Others simply stared in stunned silence. But no one could explain what was happening. There were no records, no explanations, no historical context for what they were witnessing. This was something new, something that seemed to defy all logic and reason. For an hour, the moon glowed this strange, vibrant green, its energy pulsing with an intensity that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. It felt like time was suspended, as though the normal order of the universe had been disrupted, and no one knew when, if ever, the moon would return to its usual state. Then, just as mysteriously as it had changed, the green light began to fade. The intensity of the glow dimmed, and the moon slowly returned to its familiar white hue. Within moments, it was as if nothing had ever happened. The moon was once again the serene, calming sight that had always been there, silent, steady, and unchanged. The strange event was over. The villagers, though relieved, were left with a lingering sense of unease. They spoke of the moon's strange color in whispers, but no one could quite put into words what they had experienced. The moment had been so surreal, so unexplainable, that they began to wonder if they had imagined it. Perhaps it was some kind of mass hallucination, some shared vision created by the power of the mind. Or perhaps they thought it was a sign, something greater than they could comprehend. Days passed, but the memory of the green moon stayed with them. There were no answers, no explanations. It wasn't recorded in any astronomical logs. No scientist or expert could provide a reasonable explanation for the strange event. The moon, after all, had returned to its normal state, as if nothing had ever happened. But for those who had witnessed it, the experience would never be forgotten. It was an anomaly that became known as the Lost Moon Glitch, a name that was whispered among the villagers for years to come. It was a reminder that the universe, vast and mysterious, still held many secrets, some of which we might never fully understand. The moon, which had always been a symbol of stability and constancy, had shown them that even in the most predictable things, there could be moments of strangeness and wonder. And so, as the days turned into years, the people of the village would sometimes find themselves standing outside on quiet, clear nights, gazing up at the moon. They would remember the strange green glow and wonder, what had they truly seen that night? Was it simply an anomaly, or was it a glimpse into something far beyond our understanding, something that the moon, in its quiet majesty, had shown them for just one brief moment? As the moon shone brightly overhead, they would close their eyes, letting the cool night air wash over them, and allow themselves to wonder, what if there was more to the moon than anyone had ever realized? Story 4. The Moving Moon. There are many things about the moon that we take for granted. We all know that the moon follows a predictable path across the sky, traveling from east to west in its quiet, steady arc. It rises in the evening, shining brightly over the earth, and sets in the early morning, leaving the world in darkness until it returns again. We've all seen the moon travel across the sky, and it's something we've grown used to, something we never think twice about. But one night, in a sleepy coastal town, something happened that defied all reason, all logic, and everything the villagers thought they knew about the universe. It was a quiet evening, the air thick with the scent of salt water and the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore. The people of the town were going about their usual routines, perhaps walking along the beach or sitting on their porches, enjoying the peaceful night. As the evening wore on, the full moon rose in the sky, just as it always did. It shone brightly, casting a soft, silver glow over the town and the ocean beyond. People stood outside, as they often did, and gazed up at the moon, mesmerized by its beauty. Everything seemed normal. There was no hint of anything unusual. But then, as the moon reached a certain point in the sky, something strange began to happen. Instead of following its usual, predictable arc from east to west, the moon began to move in the opposite direction. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, it began to shift. It wasn't a sudden movement, but a gradual change, a subtle reversal in its path. The moon, which had always moved from east to west, began to travel west to east. At first, people thought they were seeing things. They blinked their eyes, rubbed them, and stared again. It couldn't be. The moon was simply doing what it always did, right? But as the moon continued its journey, the doubt turned into certainty. The moon was moving against the flow of time, reversing its natural course. People stood frozen in their yards, staring upward, trying to make sense of what was happening. It was as though the laws of nature had been suddenly turned upside down. The moon, which was always so steady and predictable, was now traveling in a direction it was never supposed to take. The stars above seemed to hold their breath, the air grew still, and the world seemed to pause, caught in this strange moment of cosmic dissonance. The town's residents gathered outside, drawn by the unusual sight. They spoke in hushed voices, whispering nervously to one another. What was going on? Could this be some kind of astronomical phenomenon they had never seen before? Or was it something more? Perhaps a glitch in the very fabric of reality itself, something beyond their understanding. For hours, the moon continued its strange journey, moving slowly and deliberately from west to east. The ocean waves, usually steady and rhythmic, seemed to fall in time with the moon's strange movement, as if the entire world was caught in this momentary pause, this disruption in the natural order. The townspeople watched in stunned silence, unable to tear their eyes away from the moon. They had never seen anything like it, and they began to feel a creeping unease. Time itself seemed to be bending, shifting, as though the very flow of the universe had been altered. As the hours passed, the moon continued its journey. It wasn't just an isolated incident. The path was consistent, following a steady, almost deliberate reverse course. The town, once full of life and laughter, was now quiet, as everyone seemed to hold their breath. People gathered in small groups, standing in awe, too afraid to speak aloud, their eyes fixed on the sky above. Why was the moon moving in such an unnatural way? Was this some kind of cosmic glitch, a malfunction in the great program of the universe? Or was it something more deliberate, something meant to send a message, to remind the people of the town that they knew far less about the world and the cosmos than they had ever imagined? The strangest part of it all was that no one else in the world seemed to notice. No other towns, no other villages, no one in the cities or on the radio had mentioned anything about the moon's strange behavior. It was as if the entire event was confined to this sleepy town, isolated and unseen by the rest of the world. It was as though the universe had chosen this small, quiet place to show something far beyond ordinary comprehension, but left the rest of the world untouched. As the night wore on and the moon's strange journey continued, the residents of the town were left to wonder. Was this a sign? Was it a message meant only for them? Or was it simply a glitch in the great wheel of the universe, something that would be forgotten in time, like a dream that fades with the morning sun? Finally, as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the moon's strange journey came to an end. It slowed, almost imperceptibly, and then began to reverse its course, moving back to the usual east to west path it had always followed. The stars began to twinkle again. The familiar hum of the night returned, and the world seemed to reset itself, returning to its natural rhythm. And just as quickly as it had started, the moon was once again a quiet, steady presence in the sky, moving as it always had. The strange event was over, but the people of the town were left with a lingering sense of unease. What had they witnessed? What had caused the moon to move against its natural course? Had they been part of something larger, something beyond their understanding? As the days passed, the town returned to normal. the residents trying to go about their lives. But the moon, as steady as ever, continued to rise in the sky each night, and every time they looked up at it, they couldn't help but remember the strange night when time itself seemed to bend and the moon moved in the opposite direction. Was it a cosmic error? A momentary glitch in the matrix of the universe? Or was it a sign of something far greater? Something they were not meant to understand? No one could say for certain. But for the people of that small town, the memory of that strange, unsettling night would linger in their minds for years to come. A mystery that could never quite be solved. A reminder that there are still things in the world that we cannot explain. Story 5. The moon that changed its shape. There are stories that are passed down through generations, whispered in hushed tones around campfires, shared by old storytellers who know the value of secrets. Some stories are told to bring comfort, while others are told to warn or to remind us that the world is full of mysteries, many of which are beyond our understanding. This is one such story, a tale of the moon, which, for reasons no one could explain, shifted shape one quiet night, transforming into something unrecognizable. It began on a calm evening in a quiet village, nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, where the night sky stretched endlessly above. The stars sparkled like tiny jewels scattered across the heavens, and the moon, as it always did, shone brightly over the land. The villagers had lived in peace for generations, and the moon had always been a comforting presence in their lives. Its steady, round shape was as familiar as the gentle rhythms of life itself. One evening, as the full moon rose high in the sky, a young boy named Elias lay in his bed, staring out of his window as he often did. The night was calm, and he felt a peaceful sense of comfort as he gazed up at the familiar sight of the glowing orb. But that night, something felt different. There was a quiet stillness in the air, and for some reason, Elias found himself unable to look away from the moon. It was as though it was calling to him, drawing his attention more than usual. As he watched, something began to happen. The moon, which had always been a perfect circle, began to shift. At first, it was so subtle that Elias thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no, the moon was changing. Slowly at first, the edges began to blur, as though the smooth, round shape was being pulled and stretched by some invisible force. The light of the moon flickered briefly, casting strange, elongated shadows across the room. Elias's breath quickened as he sat up in bed, trying to understand what he was seeing. The moon no longer looked like the perfect, serene orb that it had always been. It began to contort, its smooth curve becoming jagged, uneven. The shape was warping, twisting into something almost unrecognizable. Elias's eyes widened in disbelief as the moon stretched further, transforming into a bizarre, alien-like figure. It was no longer round. Now it had sharp angles and long, jagged edges, like the shape of a giant eye staring directly at him. Its surface shimmered, glowing faintly, as though the moon itself had become a living entity, watching him from the night sky. Elias felt his heart race as he stared in shock at the bizarre transformation unfolding before him. His breath quickened, and his mind screamed for him to look away, to escape the eerie sight before it consumed him. But he couldn't. He was frozen, unable to turn his gaze from the strange shape of the moon. It felt as though the very essence of the night had shifted. Something ancient, something forgotten, had awakened, and it was staring directly at him. The eerie eye in the sky seemed to pulse, as though it was alive. Elias's skin prickled with fear, and a strange, unsettling sensation crept over him, as if the moon were communicating with him somehow, speaking without words. Was it a warning? A message from a world beyond his understanding? Or was it simply a fleeting, inexplicable moment that would vanish as quickly as it had appeared? For what felt like an eternity, Elias sat there, eyes locked onto the moon as it continued to twist and shape-shift in the night sky. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the transformation stopped. The moon, still glowing with its silvery light, returned to its usual round shape. It was as though nothing had happened, as though the strange, unsettling moment had been nothing but a dream. The moon, once again smooth and steady, hung in the sky as it always had, casting its familiar light over the land. Elias stared in disbelief, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Had it all been a dream? Or had the moon truly changed shape, revealing something deeper, something hidden from the eyes of the world? He didn't know. He couldn't explain it. All he knew was that from that night on, whenever he looked at the moon, a deep, lingering unease filled his heart. The next day, Elias tried to tell his friends about what he had seen. He spoke with excitement, eager to share his experience, to make sense of the strange transformation. But his friends only laughed at him. They teased him, claiming that he had simply dreamt it all up. "The moon doesn't change shape," they said with a knowing smile. "You must have imagined it." Elias, however, knew the truth deep inside. He knew what he had seen was real. The moon had changed. It had become something else, something not of this world. And despite his friends' laughter, despite their dismissal, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the moon had shown him something ancient, something forgotten, something that the world had lost over time. And so, as the years went on, Elias found that every time he looked up at the moon, he could never look at it the same way again. He couldn't forget the night it had shifted, and he couldn't forget the strange, unsettling image of that giant watching eye. The moon, once a comforting presence in his life, now seemed to hold a secret, one that he was never meant to fully understand. In time, Elias grew older, but the memory of that night stayed with him, haunting him in quiet moments when the moon was full and bright. And sometimes, when he lay in bed, staring out the window at the glowing orb in the sky, he would wonder, what had he really seen that night? What was the moon trying to show him? Was it a warning, a message? Or was it simply a glimpse into something much deeper, something beyond the reach of human understanding? But no matter how many years passed, Elias would never forget that night, and he would never look at the moon in the same way again. There was something more to it, something hidden beneath its bright, familiar surface. Story 6. The Vanishing Crater. It was an evening like any other when a group of scientists gathered in a remote observatory, high up in the mountains, their eyes turned toward the moon. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling like distant diamonds, and the air was crisp with the promise of a quiet night ahead. These scientists were part of a dedicated team of astronomers who spent their nights studying the mysteries of the cosmos. They had spent countless hours focused on the moon, tracking its phases, its craters, and its many secrets. But on this particular night, they had something different in mind. Several months earlier, a meteorite had crashed into the surface of the moon, leaving behind a perfect, clean crater. The impact was so significant that even amateur stargazers, with their small telescopes, could spot it on the moon's surface. It was a remarkable event, one that had captured the attention of astronomers around the world. The crater was perfectly round, a deep impression in the lunar surface, visible even without the most sophisticated equipment. That night, the team of scientists had gathered to observe this crater, eager to study the aftermath of the meteorite's impact. They were prepared to analyze its size, its depth, and the way it might have changed the surrounding surface. With their instruments carefully calibrated, they focused their telescopes on the exact spot where the crater had once been. But as they peered through the lenses, their excitement quickly turned to confusion. The crater was gone. At first, they thought it was a mistake, that something had gone wrong with their equipment. Perhaps there was a glitch in the telescope's lens, or maybe the instruments were malfunctioning. They adjusted the focus, recalibrated the settings, and double-checked the coordinates. But no matter how many times they tried, the crater was simply not there. It was as though it had never existed. There was no sign of the deep, jagged impression left by the meteorite's impact. The surface of the moon in that spot appeared smooth, undisturbed, as if it had been untouched for eons. The scientists were baffled. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Could the crater have somehow been covered up, hidden by some natural process they had never considered? Could the surface of the moon have shifted in such a way that the crater was no longer visible? They quickly checked their data, comparing it with previous photographs and recordings. No, the crater had been there, without a doubt. But now, it was gone. As the night wore on, the confusion only deepened. They took turns observing the lunar surface, hoping that it was simply an error in their observation. Perhaps the lighting or the angle had changed, making the crater appear to have vanished. But every time they looked, it was the same. The crater, once a clear and undeniable mark on the moon's surface, had disappeared completely. The next morning, they sent their findings to colleagues at observatories around the world. Scientists from across the globe joined in the investigation, trying to understand what had happened. Was it a trick of the light, a mirage caused by the angle of the sun reflecting off the surface? Was there some kind of cosmic dust or debris that had settled over the area, obscuring the crater's existence? Or was it something else, something far stranger, something that no one could explain? Theories flew fast and furious. Some of the scientists suggested that it might have been an unusual geological phenomenon, an event where the moon's surface shifted in response to the impact, causing the crater to disappear over time. They pointed to the fact that the moon's surface was constantly changing, subject to forces that weren't always fully understood. But even these scientists couldn't explain why the crater had disappeared so suddenly, without any warning. Could the moon's surface truly shift in such a way that a large, visible crater simply vanished in the blink of an eye? Others proposed that it was a cosmic anomaly, perhaps some kind of glitch in the fabric of space-time itself. Could the crater have been erased from existence in some way that defied the laws of physics? What if there were forces at work in the universe that could alter the very reality of what we saw, erasing physical evidence of events that had once happened? It was a theory that sounded like science fiction, but the more the scientists thought about it, the more it seemed like a possibility. After all, no one could explain how the crater had vanished. As the days passed, the mystery deepened. The crater was never seen again, and no one could offer a satisfactory explanation for its disappearance. It wasn't just the disappearance that puzzled the scientists. It was the fact that no one had noticed anything unusual about it at first. No one had seen it vanish. It was as though the crater had simply been erased from time itself. And what's more, no one could find any trace of the impact that had caused it. There was no sign of debris or any other disturbance in the area. It was as though the moon had wiped the crater from existence. Theories about what had happened ranged from the plausible to the impossible. Some suggested that it was a rare lunar event, one that was still beyond the reach of human understanding. Others wondered if it had been a deliberate act of cosmic interference, some hidden force at work that had chosen to remove the crater, as if the universe itself had decided that the evidence of the meteorite impact should never be seen again. In the years that followed, the story of the vanishing crater became a legend, whispered among scientists and stargazers alike. Some dismissed it as a simple error in observation, a strange quirk of the moon's surface that no one had yet understood. But for those who had seen it for themselves, there was no doubt. Something extraordinary had happened that night. The crater, which had once been a permanent mark on the moon's surface, had simply disappeared, as if it had never existed. And so, the mystery of the vanishing crater remains unsolved to this day. Some say it was a glitch in the cosmic system, a disruption in the natural order that we were never meant to understand. Others claim it was a reminder that the moon, in all its beauty and majesty, holds secrets far beyond our grasp, secrets that we may never uncover, no matter how hard we try. As you drift into sleep, think of that lonely crater, once so clear and visible, now gone, as if erased from the very fabric of the universe. Perhaps tonight, the moon will whisper its secrets to you in your dreams, and you'll learn more about the mysteries it holds, those things that are hidden just beyond the reach of our understanding. Story 7. The Moon's Shadow on the Earth. There are moments in life when the world seems to pause, when the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the impossible feels within reach. These moments are fleeting, rare, and often leave us with more questions than answers. One such moment occurred during a rare celestial event, a total lunar eclipse, an event that only happens a few times in a lifetime. It was a quiet evening, and all around the world, people eagerly awaited the moment when the Earth's shadow would begin to fall across the moon. The excitement was palpable. For weeks, astronomers had been talking about this event, predicting the exact time when the Earth would pass between the sun and the moon, casting a dark shadow over the lunar surface. It was a rare occurrence, and people were prepared to witness the moon turn a deep, eerie red as it entered the shadow. The night arrived, and across the globe, families, friends, and stargazers gathered in fields, on rooftops, and in their backyards, hoping to catch a glimpse of this awe-inspiring sight. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling softly, and the air was cool as people turned their eyes toward the heavens. The anticipation was thick, and the excitement of witnessing such a celestial spectacle filled the hearts of those who had waited so long. As the time drew near, the shadow of the earth began to slowly creep across the face of the moon, just as it always had. It started as a subtle darkening, a slight dimming of the moon's light. The familiar white glow of the moon began to fade, replaced by a reddish hue. The red light of the moon, illuminated by the Earth's atmosphere, filled the sky with an otherworldly, almost haunting glow. But then, something unexpected happened. As the Earth's shadow continued to fall across the moon, something else appeared. A thin, dark line of shadow began to form on the Earth, stretching across the landscape below. It was a straight line, perfectly drawn, as if it had been painted across the world with a delicate brush. People who were watching the eclipse didn't know what to make of it. The line moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, across the ground, as though it were somehow connected to the moon above. This was not a natural phenomenon. It wasn't a shadow cast by clouds, nor was it a trick of the light. The line was dark, but it wasn't cast by anything in the sky. It was as though the moon itself was casting a shadow, not on the moon, but on the land below. The line moved quietly, slowly, across the earth. It was visible to anyone who happened to be watching at that moment. Some said it was the strangest thing they had ever seen. It was ethereal, almost like a dream, something that shouldn't be possible. Yet there it was, stretching across fields, forests, and streets, leaving no trace of its passage once it had moved on. As the shadow of the moon deepened and the total lunar eclipse reached its peak, the strange shadow on Earth continued to drift untouched by the natural laws of the world. Those who witnessed it described the line as something otherworldly, as if it were not a part of this world at all. It wasn't a shadow that could be explained by any physical force they knew. The shadow didn't behave like a normal eclipse shadow. It didn't linger. It didn't cast its dark presence across the landscape for long. It passed quickly, almost like a fleeting moment in time, before it faded away, as though it had never been there. There was a strange feeling that came with it, a sense of unreality, as though time itself had shifted, or as if the world was suddenly slightly out of sync. The shadow seemed to break the natural flow of things, a glitch in reality that left everyone who saw it feeling unsettled. Was it a message? Was it a cosmic sign, a symbol from the universe, or just an oddity of the cosmos that no one would ever be able to fully understand? As quickly as it appeared, the shadow faded. The moon completed its eclipse, and the red glow filled the sky, as if nothing unusual had happened. The world below was bathed in moonlight once again, and the shadow disappeared, leaving only a lingering sense of awe and confusion in its wake. There were no answers, no explanations, just the memory of a moment that felt too strange to be real. People tried to make sense of it in the days that followed. Was it a rare optical illusion? Some kind of atmospheric phenomenon that no one had ever observed before? Perhaps it was just a trick of the light, a momentary lapse in the way the moon and Earth interacted. But deep down, those who had seen it knew it wasn't just that. It wasn't just an illusion. It felt too real, too tangible, something beyond the ordinary. Some whispered that it was a sign, an omen of sorts, though no one dared to say exactly what it meant. Others believed that it was simply an extraordinary coincidence, a glitch in the cosmic machinery, a moment that could never be explained. Years passed, but for those who had witnessed the moon's shadow on the earth, that strange, fleeting moment remained etched in their memories. Whenever they gazed up at the moon, they couldn't help but wonder, what was that shadow? What had caused it? Was it a message from the universe, or just a mysterious event that would never be understood? And so, as you lay back and close your eyes, let the mystery of that strange shadow fill your mind. Imagine the moon, its red glow casting a soft light across the world, and the shadow that moved silently below, leaving no trace. What did it mean? Was it a cosmic code, or simply an oddity of the universe? Perhaps in your dreams, you'll find the answer, or perhaps the mystery will remain, as the moon continues to shine above, its secrets hidden just out of reach. Story 8. The Moon's Ancient Voice. In a small village by the ocean, people would gather by the beach at night, waiting for the moon to rise. They believed that on certain nights, the moon spoke to them, though not with words. The moon's voice was more like a soft, whispering sound, one that could only be heard by those who truly listened. It wasn't a sound that anyone could describe clearly. It was faint, like the distant sound of waves crashing or wind moving through the trees. But one evening, something extraordinary happened. As the moon rose, it began to hum, not a whisper, not a breeze, but a clear, melodic tone that reverberated through the air. The villagers gathered around, their hearts racing in wonder, as the sound seemed to fill their souls with a sense of ancient wisdom. The voice seemed to carry a message, an unspoken truth, a warning, or perhaps a blessing. But the villagers, though deeply moved, could never remember what the moon had said. When the sound faded, they were left with only the echo of the experience, unsure of whether it had been real or a shared dream.